There are a lot of differences that people point out between Marvel and DC that make either one better or worse than the other. And one of the things that people often hold up, either in favor or denigration of Marvel, is the fact that they have never strictly, by definition, had a reboot. Some people don't mind that. I count myself among them. Other people do. People will say stuff like Secret Wars 2015 was a reboot. Definitely not. People will say Heroes Reborn was a reboot. Don't think so. Um, all of these things have essentially allowed for a rubber banding, you could say, or a fresh start for a new era, but never a blank slate like we've seen with DC. But after all these years, there are a lot of warts in that continuity. And so the question is, would it help Marvel to reboot mainline continuity? Does Marvel need a reboot?
Reboot meaning new 52 style, clean the slate.
Yes.
Even New 52 didn't fully clean the slate, so
Wow, that's a different video again.
my answer. Go ahead, Cal.
Please.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. All right.
I don't
I'll go
think
then.
so. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I've always been a proponent of Marvel's sliding continuity timescale or sliding timescale continuity. I don't think it needs a reboot. I think there is a pretty clear timeline of events that you can follow in Marvel to get caught up to speed. I think things like Crisis on Infinite Earths at DC, while in the moment they helped streamline continuity, I think for new readers getting into comics now, that makes it tricky. And I've kind of liked how Marvel's kind of just put their foot down and been like, no, this kind of exists in the real world at any given time when the book's coming out, and everything has happened. That's appealing to me. Again, that lends to the world outside your window that Marvel kind of touted during its inception. The real world doesn't reboot. Everything happens in the real world. So I've enjoyed that, and I prefer that.
I think too, Marvel also uses World War II as a bit of an anchor.
Strangely, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's strange. I think it's just like that's when these were being published, and that's when their most popular characters were being made, either as a response to the actual war or sort of as sort of a retcon into like the horrors of the world, right? Those being Captain America and Magneto. There are others, but those are the two prominent ones that come to mind.
I think like Nick Fury too, in that
Nick Fury, yeah, great, yeah. And they both have this timelessness about them that the longer amount of time that they were either frozen, in Captain America's case, or mysteriously de-aged or mutant revived, it it adds a weirdly simple explanation, a weirdly simple grounding in the world that's like, oh, that guy's been alive since World War II. Great.
Super Soldier Serum. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, I think the only time that it really strikes me weird is characters like Punisher whose origins take place in very specific times. I think when he first came out, it was the Vietnam War, and it's since moved, something like that.
Iron Man very similarly.
Yeah. And so that's a little bit weird. Like, I guess in 10 years, the Punisher's origin will have happened during like 9/11 or in the Iraq War or something like that. Um, those things are a little weird, but I kind of just say whatever, because that's just how it has to be in order for us to continue to get what we're getting. But I think that a lot of people don't want Marvel to have a long continuity. They want it to reboot, but you're losing so much. You're losing so much, and I don't think it's really worth it.
And I think they're looking at it in too much of a macro sense. Like Marvel reinvents a lot of their characters, but in smaller moments. You mentioned Heroes Reborn, like that reinvented, for better or for worse, the Avengers at the time, which was kind of stagnating, towards the latter, towards the latter half of the '90s. Um, they've reinvented the Avengers a lot. All new, all different was technically a reinvention of the Avengers in a way. X-Men, House and Powers, reinvention of the X-Men. One More Day, reinvention of Spider-Man. So there's almost like these mini reboots happening for specific properties or sections of the Marvel Universe without having to do it, whole hog.
I don't consider them reboots. That's just story. That's just
Yeah,
things moving forward.
and
I think the language of reboot, it implies something that's like a complete overhaul, and I think it would shatter what makes Marvel work to do anything close to that.
I agree. I'm just saying those tiny reinventions that happen throughout the years negates the need for a reboot
Hmm.
because things are refreshing and kind of recontextualizing in the moment.
Yeah, I think I think too that it's cool. Like whenever you started reading Marvel comics, like for me, it was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you know, all those things are relevant now. They're all still sort of there. Like the same characters who engaged in the Civil War are the same exact ones that I'm reading about now. If you were to try to apply the same like logic or thought process to somebody like Superman, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like sometimes people will ask us those kinds of questions. When it comes to DC characters, I have no idea how to answer that.
And I like that with Marvel because it happened. It has its good and its bad. Like you can have most recently, I guess, in Avengers, Jed McKay's Avengers, where Captain Marvel and Iron Man are on the team for the first time in years since Civil War II. But that can be addressed there. That can be talked about. Um, then you have maybe something weird with like Nick Spencer's Spider-Man run brings up stuff from Sin's past, you know, which is like okay, everything has happened, even the stuff that people don't really like. And then in the future, when historical context is given to stories, there can be addendums to it. Maybe people can consider some of them retcons, but some of them are addendums to kind of recontextualize things that maybe had a different meaning when they originally came out, like Sin's past.
And I think that's what's more important or crucial to this argument anyway is the ability to recontextualize, to keep things going and to um, elongate a character like this is to broaden perspective to a certain degree. So in the case of Sin's past, well, later in life, Peter finds out, oh, that didn't shake out the way he thought he did when he was just in the middle of dealing with his two clone children, right? Or Norman's two clone children. There were other things going on that caused that maybe that didn't actually happen. There were all sorts of things. And that's, that's another aspect of real life that makes Marvel work.
And when I think of like the DC universe and then the Marvel universe, I can think of the DC universe as like a timeline. If you were to put it out on a board, and then there's big cuts where the crises happen, and then there's this era, and then there's this era. Marvel is almost like a flowchart where it's like, here's something that came out, last week, but it references something that came out in 2007. You can kind of point back to things a little more with Marvel and reference things that I feel like DC has to almost, like walk around in some points, um, especially with flashes. And, what's happened with the flashes, the crises, and the flashpoints. That I have a little more fun with Marvel. Spider-Man's the big one that comes to mind. The current Zeb Wells run, when that came out with the whole Paul controversy, that called back a two-issue story of Spider-Man that I read in 2009 or 2010. And it's like, oh, that is awesome that I can go back, a decade to kind of have more story for something that I've read previously, which is a little tricky with DC.
I also feel like people just don't know. People don't even know what a reboot necessarily is, and I think that all of these terminologies and all of these ideas, they end up confusing people, and that's not good. It's not good for people to end up confused because they don't know what's still in continuity and what isn't. And I guess, you could make the argument that there are definitely things in Marvel that are not in continuity anymore that used to be. But it's not because it was erased by a holistic reboot. That won't be the case. And that's what I love. Like when you read a story with Moira McTaggart in it from the 90s or the 80s, she wasn't a mutant then, but she is now, and when you read those now, she's a mutant, like that's a retcon, but it's not because it's a different version of Moira. It's the same person.
And I do think there are some downsides to it, but I don't think they outweigh the benefits. Like some downsides, I would say, is that it is a little hard sometimes for people who are new to know where to start. Reboots are huge jumping on points for people, but they're also jumping off points. We just did a DC New 52 retrospective, and there were a lot of people who that was a jumping off point for them. And we kind of questioned, was it worth it in the long run, long scheme of things? Where like Marvel, sometimes it is a little tricky to know where you jump in on a volume of Spider-Man if you're looking at it in trades. Where when we're doing the book club, it's so much easier to know a DC trade to pick. Like I can pick a Batman book because I'm used to them being stories. Whereas Spider-Man, they're almost too continuous to really for me to be able to pick. All right, I'm going to pick volume 7 of a certain run. So I think there are negatives, but again, I think the positives outweigh those negatives.
I think it just ultimately breaks immersion. Like as simply as I can say it. If you watch soap operas or wrestling, they don't reboot. Anything can happen within the confines of those stories, except a back to one whole scale reboot of everything. That's what can't happen because that breaks it, that shatters it. And I think that's a big part of Marvel's secret sauce. So, if you are one of those people who says that Marvel should reboot, why? What is your reasoning? Why do you believe that? And do you think that, like, what problems does Marvel have that a reboot would solve? Do you guys have any thoughts on that actually? Like, are there any problems that Marvel has that a reboot would solve?
I think they have a fix right now, and that's the Ultimate Universe.
Putting that aside,
Sure.
just the MU.
Not yet, but I can maybe see that happening in the future. Because having things so tied to World War II, when we're 100 years in the future, maybe that sliding time scale will be a little more hard to, differentiate from. Um, but I don't think that's a problem right now. I honestly don't think they have any problems in terms of general continuity.
Yeah, I don't know that I do either. I feel like everything that is in play at the moment can be explained by the sliding time scale. I was thinking about the Punisher and Iron Man, being Vietnam and then Iraq and, eventually 9/11. What's next, right? Um, something.
Oh God, please no,
Yeah, that was a depressing sentence.
Well,
nothing next.
I mean, they're two characters born out of tragedy. It's going to be something.
Well, and I think Marvel has also played with legacy a little more recently. It's almost like they're seeing this issue coming about. Um, Honestly, it feels like they're only seeing the issue now because of the movies and having actors having to leave roles, and you can't
What
really
issue are you talking about?
um, having people coming into mantles like Sam coming in as Captain America, or what they really tried doing it all new with like Riri, um, and Amadeus Cho was Hulk at one point, and try and get like younger generations to fill those shoes. They've kind of backed away from it a bit, but I do think the movies are probably going to push them more in that direction. And having to, like the main characters maybe not being around or as prominent all the time.
So we could see a reboot in the films
Sure.
before we see one in a real one in the comics.
I almost guarantee that. Yeah.
I think a reboot of the MCU would be a big mistake. That's probably a different video, but I think it has the same effect that a reboot of the comics does. And DC in the film world is going to have a lot of issues bringing people into the fold who don't understand, like, why is all this stuff different? And then also there are now, it's like a whole different subject, but the Snyder fans are now like out of the, they're not interested in what's going to happen now. So it's a whole thing. I think it creates a schism. I just think a reboot is a bad idea that Marvel just doesn't have to do.
Yeah,
There's a part of me though that wants me to like see them tease it a bit. Like, don't do it, but like mess with people a bit. Do another Secret Wars level thing that could be like, oh no, what's gonna happen? Actually, don't redo the entire line like you did during that though.
All right, guys, let us know what you think about that. Let us know if you feel like Marvel needs a reboot and why. What problems would it fix? Anything you guys think, make sure you leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, like the video. All those things help us out a bunch. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.